You mentioned COVID is kind of relaxing now. Things seem to be getting under control. And just to give you an example, it's a typical example. Last night, we had to go to Sacramento for a wedding reception. My Cindy's nephew. And today's the 20th, right? Yeah, the 20th of last year was when they got married. So the marriage ceremony was exactly a year ago. Now we have the reception 1 year later. You know? So it kind of completes the cycle of the entire marriage ceremony. So it was fun. It was good to see them. I haven't, or neither has Cindy, seen her sisters for almost 2 years. So yeah, it's good that things are getting a little better now. Oh, June, could you kind of give me the time, let's say quarter to 1?
Right.
When we get to 1:45? Yeah, okay, because the message I have today is, I think a little longer than I had anticipated, so I want to break it up into 2 parts. And plus we also have communion today too, so let me call up the slide here.
You talk must have changed its mind. My standard is that it works, so you need to do it.
Okay. So what I would like to talk today about is the Apostle Paul. In particular, his 4th missionary journey, and that was to Rome. So obviously he had 3 previous missionary journeys. And Paul had longed to go to Rome for quite a long time. But how he gets there is was not exactly smooth sailing, let's say. And what's interesting is some commentators say that it really wasn't a missionary journey, this one to Rome, because Paul didn't plan it out. He didn't know when he was going. He didn't know the route that he was going to take. He had no idea what cities he was going to visit on his way to Rome. So that's the reason why some say it wasn't really a missionary journey. But nevertheless, he had long to go there. And as you see here, you see Paul in chains. So he was actually in prison under the watchful eye of a Roman guard there. And kneeling at his feet is Luke. Luke is writing whatever Paul is talking about. So Luke was a constant companion of Paul, particularly during this 4th missionary journey, if you want to use the term. Now, because Paul really had no control over how, when he's going to get there, some ask the question, was this planned by God, or was it planned by the devil, who was trying to thwart God's plan? Of course, we don't know the answer to that. Nevertheless, irrespective of which way it went, whether it was God planning it or the devil trying to stop Paul from going to Rome, it still fulfills God's purpose. And you will see how that works out. So let's start with the end of Paul's missionary journey, his third missionary journey. And it was a fairly lengthy journey there. And as you know, he ends up in Cenchrea and Corinth. And that's where he announces that, well, actually he announces before he gets there, that he wants to go to Rome. But when he gets to Corinth and Cenchrea, that's, as you might recall, he wrote the epistle to the Romans. And that's where he decides that Phoebe was going to be his personal messenger to deliver this lengthy document, this lengthy epistle of Rome to Rome. And he was eager to get the letter there before he actually got there, because he knew it'd be a while before he would get to Rome. So he's ending his third missionary journey now. That's Phoebe and Paul. And as you can see, Paul's handing her the epistle to the Romans. So he's ending his journey now, and he arrives in, let me, if I can blow that up. He arrives first in Tyre, and then from Tyre he goes down to Caesarea. As you can tell, both in Tyre and Caesarea, he's told by the brethren there not to go to Jerusalem. Okay? And they know that the Orthodox Jews there were hostile toward Paul, particularly some of the rumors that they have heard as part of his missionary trip. You see, for example, in Tyre it says, through the Spirit, and I want you to keep in mind those through the Spirit. They told Paul not to go to Jerusalem. And then when he gets to Caesarea, it says, Agabus, a prophet from Judea, came to visit us. He prophesied, the Holy Spirit says, you will be tied up by the Jews, and they will hand you over to those who are not Jews, meaning to the Roman soldiers. So he was going to be in prison. So they're warning him. In Tyre, it says, through the Spirit. In Caesarea, Agabus says, the Holy Spirit says. So keep that in mind. Now, because of those verses, there are those that believe that Paul disobeyed the Holy Spirit because he insisted that he was going to go. But let's kind of step back a little bit and look at a couple of chapters before the incident in Tyre and Caesarea. For example, in Acts 21, it says, Paul resolved in the Spirit to go to Jerusalem. And then the next chapter, it says, and now, compelled by the Spirit, I am going to Jerusalem, not knowing what will happen to me. I only know that in every city, the Holy Spirit warns me that prison and hardship are facing me. So here, Paul is getting a direction from the Holy Spirit to go. But then in Tyre and Caesarea, the brethren warned him not to go. So what's going on here is, did the Holy Spirit change his mind? Did he really disobey the Holy Spirit by going? Okay, so you have two camps of people. Some believe he truly disobeyed the Holy Spirit and therefore paid the price when he was in Jerusalem. And others say, no, he didn't, because he was told beforehand to go by the Holy Spirit. So I think in order to resolve this, we have to look at more carefully what he was actually told in Tyre and Caesarea. Okay, so we're just going to compare scriptures now. So Paul, in the earlier chapter, in Acts 20, he had a direct vision from the Holy Spirit himself, telling him to go. I think that's pretty clear. Whereas, when he gets to Tyre and Caesarea, the brethren are telling him to go. He's not getting direction directly from the Spirit, is he? The brethren is telling him not to go. And they're saying that through the Spirit, Paul should not go. So, what's the difference, right? What's the difference? Now, those that don't believe that Paul disobeyed the Spirit feel that through the Spirit, the brethren in Tyre did not really say not to go. But the brethren are actually interpreting what the Spirit may have said and decided, wow, these bad things are going to happen to Paul. He better not go. Okay? So, and I think that's confirmed by what happens in Caesarea. Because if you read that carefully, it says, Agabus came to visit us. He prophesied, the Holy Spirit says. And what the Holy Spirit says is that he's going to be imprisoned. The Jews going to tie him up and hand him over to the Roman soldiers. There's nothing there that tells us that the Holy Spirit said not to go, right? It just says that if you go or when you go, these hardships are going to happen to you. Okay, so I'm in the camp of Paul did not disobey. Okay, but you might have your own opinion, because there are good commentaries that say that he truly did disobey. So my thought is, well, just like if you're going on vacation, let's say to on vacation, and it's almost time to go on vacation, and you hear from a friend, and your friend says, well, the police told me that there's rioting in that city, and the area of the city that you're going has a very high crime rate, and therefore, being your friend, you should not go. Right? And I mean, that's a natural conclusion. High crime rate, well, maybe I really shouldn't go. But the police didn't tell him not to go, right? It's that if you go, there's a high risk that you're gonna get burglarized or killed or something like that. So that's the same analogy. So I think the Holy Spirit is not telling the brethren in Tyre that Paul should not go, but if you go, certain things are going to happen. Therefore, Paul, you really shouldn't go. That's what the brethren were saying. Not that the Holy Spirit told him that he shouldn't go. Okay, that's the complexity of this situation. And that's how I resolve it in my own mind. Okay, but you might have a different interpretation. So finally, he gets to Rome, and he meets with James in the Church of Rome. James, remember, is the half-brother of Jesus Christ. He's the leader of the church. And so they have good greetings. The question is, where are the other 12 disciples? It's just James. I mean, where are they? Luke doesn't tell us in Acts where they were. Remember now, this is maybe 25, almost 30 years since Christ has passed away in the resurrection. So It's quite possible that some of the 12 have been martyred by now. Others were probably like Paul on missionary trips to other parts of the Roman Empire and possibly beyond. So James greets Paul, and he says to Paul, there are thousands of Jews who have also embraced the faith and are passionately keeping the law of Moses. So that's good news, that the church is growing. But this is the bad news. They've heard a rumor that you've been instructing the Jews everywhere to abandon Moses by telling them they don't need to be circumcised. The children don't need to be circumcised or keep the Jewish customs. Okay? So that's the rumor that's going on about Paul's mission. So that is true when Paul is talking to the Gentiles, right? To the Gentiles who are being converted, that they don't have to circumcise their children, you don't have to worry about their keeping the holy days or only eating clean food and so on. But you notice that even the Jews that were converted were still keeping the law of Moses. And the question, is that good or is that bad or what? Okay. Now, the Jews that were being converted, they knew that Christ was now their central person of worship. They knew that. They also knew that because of their heritage, they still loved to keep the holy days, a lot of the rituals, a lot of the customs of their heritage. But they also recognized that it wasn't a requirement. It was not necessary for salvation. So that's the important distinction. Even though they kept it, they were doing it to glorify Jesus Christ, not because they had to. Okay, but what the rumors were going was that Paul was teaching them otherwise. Okay. So what happens after that? So since this rumor is going around, they're afraid that if Paul is recognized, they're going to attack him. I'm talking about the Orthodox Jews now. So this is what James and the elders of the church proposed. It says, we have 4 men here who have taken a vow and are ready to have their heads shaved. Now go with them to the temple and sponsor them in the purification ceremony, so that everyone will know that these rumors are false. They see that you are one who lives according to the laws of Moses. Okay. So what James is telling Paul, that go show them that you're not teaching this false rumor about not being circumcised and all this other stuff, but participate in this particular ceremony. It's a Jewish custom. And we already have 4 men here, 4 Christian Jews that are going to go through this purification ceremony. And why are they going through this purification ceremony? Again, Luke doesn't really explain why, but what gives us a hint is that they're going to shave their heads. And those that took the Nazirite vow would shave their heads. And they would go through this purification ceremony for about 7 days. And on the 7th day, they would offer a lamb to be sacrificed. And that would complete the purification ceremony. So why these four Christian Jews decide to take this vow it's not explained, but as I understand, the Nazarite vow is not necessarily for your entire life. It was for John the Baptist, and it was for Samson. But you can take a Nazarite vow for a shorter period of time, okay, to dedicate yourself to Christ for a specific function or duties that you want to perform. It could be a week, it could be a month, but it doesn't have to be a lifetime. Okay. So Paul agrees. He's going to go through this purification ceremony. What's important to note, though, that Paul did not take the Nazarite vow. Okay, it wasn't necessary for him to do so. And but he's going to participate anyway to show the Jews of the temple that he has not abandoned his own heritage or his own customs. So he goes through this purification ceremony. There's a certain bathing part of the ceremony. Then they wait for 7 days. And then there's a sacrifice of the lamb. So you have to remember what Paul was trying to do here. It says in 1 Corinthians, I became a Jew to the Jewish people in order to win them to the Messiah. I became like one under the law to gain the people who were stuck under the law, even though I myself am not under the law. So you know the basis of why he's doing this, to try to win over the Orthodox Jews. And he goes on to explain, and to those who are without the Jewish laws, I became like them, meaning became like the Gentiles, as one without the Jewish law in order to win them, although I'm not outside the law of God, but under the law of Christ. I have adapted to the culture of every place I've gone so that I could be more easily win people to Christ. So you see his underlying rationale now for going through the purification ceremony. Okay, he goes through the cleansing process. He's still visiting in the temple. And there are certain Orthodox Jews that not only recognized Paul, but they remembered him, or these Orthodox Jews that recognized Paul were actually from Ephesus in Turkey or Asia Minor at that time. And they recognized him, and they said, well, let's see, they began to stir up the crowd because of these false rumors that they've been hearing about Paul. And they say, seize him, they shouted. Men of Israel, help us. This is the man who teaches everywhere what is contrary to our nation, our law, and this temple. And not only that, but now he brings these non-Jewish men with him into the inner courts of our temple. They had made this sacred place ritually unclean. What they thought, they recognized Paul, but they weren't sure about the four men. They thought they were Gentiles. You cannot bring Gentiles into the temple. I mean, it's a sacrilege. And that's what they were accusing Paul of, that these men that were going through the purification ceremony were not Jews, were Gentiles, and you bring these unclean people into the temple, and it's unheard of. It's just one of those no things. Only Jews can go to the inner part of the temple. So that causes a riot. It's a big uproar, and they drag Paul out of the temple to the outer courts. They start beating him up and shouting, and what happens next is that the Roman soldiers hear all this rioting that's going on, and they come to Paul's rescue. It was so difficult for the Roman soldiers to get around the crowd, but they finally got to Paul, and they actually had to carry him, to lift him up above their shoulders, to carry him out. But the Jews were really up in arms. So they they drag him to the fortress prison, and Paul asked, can I at least talk to my fellow Jews? And the Roman commander said, okay, go ahead. And so Paul was trying to calm the Jews down, and he wanted to explain that he's a Jew himself. And not only was he, let's see, do I have the, yes. He's trying to calm them down. He tells them that, yes, he was born not in Jerusalem, but in Tarsus, but he was raised primarily in Jerusalem. He was taught the laws of Moses by his famous rabbi, Gamaliel, and that, like the Jews that were trying to stone him, he was like that at once too, because he hunted down and tried to kill those Jews that were converted to Christianity. It was called the Way. That's the name of the movement of Christianity at that time, the Way. He said, I have seized them and thrown them into the prison, both men and women. All of this can be verified by the high priest and the Supreme Council of Elders. Just check. I mean, my story is true. Then he proceeds to tell them that his conversion on the road to Damascus. And he tells them that by divine appointment from Christ himself, he is supposed to go out and witness to the Jews in the Gentile nations. Now, the Orthodox Jews didn't like the word Gentiles either. So instead of calming them down, it just inflamed them more, because he's talking about Gentiles. And so they had to push him back into the fortress to calm the Jews outside to not to riot. But when you think about it, I was just thinking about Paul's approach in trying to calm the Jews down. And I think it was really appropriate to tell him that he was a fellow Jew, that he was primarily raised in Jerusalem, he was taught the laws of Moses, and so on. But just out of curiosity, what do you think he could have done differently to not inflame the crowd here? You have any thoughts on that? I've been thinking about this. Any thoughts?
You could have told them that the 4 guys are Jews.
Exactly. See, what he was trying to do here was do maybe like a typical sermon, trying to tell them about Jesus Christ and so on. But the Jews weren't there for that at this particular time. The reason why they were rioting is because they thought those 4 men were Gentiles desecrating the temple. That's what he should have talked about, to calm them. They weren't. They're fellow Jews like you. But he didn't. He launches into trying to convert them. So I think you're right, June, and that was my thought too. That if you could have taken a different approach, not be so zealous, at least the first time, in preaching the gospel, but to get to the core reason why they were rioting, But he didn't. So you see here, number one, James and the elders plan to get Paul to participate in the Jewish custom, the purification process, completely backfired. And now he's trying to preach to the Orthodox Jews, and that completely backfires. So you wonder what's going on. So they are so inflamed, they said, get rid of this man. Kill him. He doesn't deserve to live. The next day, the Roman commander, in order to try to figure out, well, what did Paul really do to cause this problem? So they go to the Sanhedrin Council, which is the governing body of the nation of Israel, the religious leaders, okay, which was composed of both the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and also the high priest. So at this hearing, Paul is allowed to defend himself. So he starts speaking. He, again, kind of underestimates their hostility toward him and their cold hearts. And what happens is that they started shouting at him, and they were also trying to punch him, which was against their own laws. And so Paul quickly understood that the council was composed of both the Pharisees and Sadducees, and he himself was at one time a Pharisee. And what's the key difference between a Sadducee and the Pharisee? The Sadducees don't believe in the resurrection of the body. So they didn't believe that Jesus was resurrected, for example. Whereas the Pharisees believed in resurrection. So Paul decides to talk about the resurrection of Christ. And that really gets the Sadducees up in arms. But it wins the side of the Pharisees because they believe in the resurrection. And so they start arguing among themselves. And they almost come to blows themselves, just among the religious leaders. And so the Roman command, of course, this is getting out of control. He's going to just have to take him out there. He's not learning anything about what Paul did wrong. So they argue. So the Roman commander has to take Paul out of there. Now, considering what has happened these last few days with Paul, everything backfired. I mean, nothing went well for him. So, and he knew that he's going to run into problems when he came to Jerusalem. The Holy Spirit told him. He was warned by his fellow brothers and sisters in Tyre and Caesarea. So why did he still want to come? What was his personal motive for coming? And for one thing, I didn't tell you that one of the reasons why he was coming to Jerusalem, because he received a lot of donations from the other Gentile churches to bring to Jerusalem to help feed the poor Christians that were there, because Judea was going through some kind of a famine at that time. So he was bringing gifts from the other churches, the Gentile churches. That was one reason. But was that the only reason, though? I mean, he can do that. Because of the problems that he was going to face, he could have had some of the other brethren from Tyre or Caesarea bring in the donations to Jerusalem. But why did he want to come, considering what has already happened to him and nothing was going well? I think this was the real reason why he came back to Jerusalem. Because he really loved his people. I mean, he was born a Jew. I mean, he was a Jew through and through, but he was a Jew for Christ. And he says here, "O Israel, my Jewish family, I feel such great sorrow and heartache for you that never leaves me." God knows these deep feelings within me as long as for you to come to faith in the Anointed One. He really wanted them converted to Jesus Christ. "My conscience will not let me speak anything but the truth. For my grief is so intense that I wish that I would be accursed, cut off from the Messiah, if it would mean that you, my people, would come to faith in him." So he really loved his people. If you look at the next chapter of Romans, it says, "My beloved brothers and sisters, the passionate desire of my heart and constant prayer to God is for my fellow Israelites to experience salvation. For I know that although they are deeply devoted to God, they are unenlightened," meaning they know nothing about Christ. Particularly the Jewish leaders. They were so caught up in their legalistic way of life. And especially the religious leaders, they were the privileged class, and they didn't want to give up any of this stuff. So, of course, they wouldn't believe that Christ, the Messiah, was the Old Testament God. So I think that was a primary reason why he came, because he loved his people so much that he really wanted them to really hear the gospel. I think another reason, well, I should say, that was Paul's reason, I think. Now, what was God's reason? Why would God send him into the lion's den? Something like this. You know, everything negative had happened so far, and everything has backfired so far. So what was God, the Holy Spirit's purpose for doing something like this? And again, this is conjecture on my part too, that I think he wanted to help Paul realize that, particularly the religious leaders, that he wanted to realize, Paul to realize that 25 years earlier, that was exactly the same way they treated Jesus. Yeah. With disdain, with contempt. Of course, they threw Jesus in prison. He suffered a lot as well. So I think he wanted Paul to realize that, and that no matter what Paul would say is not going to change anything. That's one thing. I think another reason why the Holy Spirit decided to send Paul there to kind of witness to the Orthodox Jews was that it was like a day of judgment against the religious leaders. Basically telling them, okay, here's Paul, here's another chance for you to learn about me. And of course the Holy Spirit knew that they wouldn't turn around. So it was like a judgment thing. And they're going to remember what happened, what Paul said, what Jesus said in the last day. So I think that was another reason. So Paul goes back into his prison cell, discouraged, of course, and perhaps a little frustrated. And Christ comes to him in a vision and tells him, "Continue to be courageous. For as you testify these things about me in Jerusalem, so you must also testify in Rome." So here he gets a confirmation. He's going to go to Rome. And so it's so important to remember the Holy Spirit, or Jesus here, telling him to be courageous, because he's going to need every ounce of courage, as much faith as Jesus would give him in order to bear what he's going to have to go through on his way to Rome. Oops, sorry. Did I skip something? No, I didn't. So, Paul is transferred up to Caesarea, about 70 miles north of Jerusalem, because there were rumors going on that they were going to somehow get to the Orthodox Jews were somehow going to get to Paul and murder him. The soldiers hear about this, and so they have to transport him secretly to Caesarea. And Caesarea is the provincial capital of the Judea, Samaria area. And that's where the governor was living, in Caesarea. And at that time, the governor's name was Felix, Antonio Felix. And he tells Paul, yeah, I know about the way, meaning the movement of the Christian movement at that time. So he was intellectually curious about the way. And Felix would often ask or request Paul to visit Felix so he could learn more about the way. And I think the reason for that, not because he wanted to be converted, but he wanted to find out more about Christianity and how the gospel was spreading in case he had to deal with it in the future. I think that was his ulterior motive. So he often invited him to speak with him. And Paul talked about true righteousness, self-control, the coming judgment to Felix. And I think why Paul picked these topics like true righteousness, I mean, Felix was the governor of hundreds of thousands of people in this province. And Paul wanted him to know that as governor, he has a lot of power, and he should be ruling with justice, with fairness under Roman law. Also self-control. Because he has so much power, it's very easy to abuse that power. Paul also somehow knew that Felix's young wife, Drusilla, I think that was her name. She was about 20 years old, and Felix somehow she was already married, so somehow Felix stole Drusilla away from her former husband. So I think Paul was trying to get to Felix's conscience about self-control and also about the coming judgment. He talked about basically indirectly telling him that if you don't change your lifestyle, if you don't change the way you rule, that ultimately it's going to catch up with you, and in the final judgment of things, all these sins that you've been doing are going to be brought up. And according to Luke, it said it piqued Felix's conscience, and he felt guilty, and became afraid and trembled. So whether it had any lasting effect on Felix, we don't know. It could be that the Holy Spirit is once again not only witnessing to Felix, but also telling him that here's a chance. Think about this. If you don't change your lifestyle, it's going to come back to haunt you in the last day. So that could be the reason for the Holy Spirit doing this. Well, Felix actually doesn't do anything with Paul. He can't figure out why he's still in prison, because he has done nothing to violate Roman law. But in order to appease the Jews that were living not only in Caesarea, but through the whole area of Judea and Samaria, he kept them in prison. And he kept them in prison for 2 years in Caesarea. So, what time do you have?
12:37.
12:37, okay. So 2 years go by. Felix is no longer governor. He's transferred to some other part of the Roman Empire. They have a new governor now, and his name is Festus. And this is happening around 57 through 59 AD approximate time. What Festus wants to do is that he wants to send him back to Jerusalem for the trial. Again, to appease the Jews. Paul objects, and he reminds Festus that I'm a Roman citizen. You know, I have rights as a Roman citizen, and I'm going to appeal to Caesar to have Caesar hear my defense. So when Festus hears this, he decides, okay, I'm not going to send you back to Jerusalem. I'll put you on a ship to go to Rome. But before he does that, he's also interested in hearing about the way. And so he has his own hearing. And at this hearing, he invites a lot of the elite Romans that were living in that area, a lot of the people that worked for Caesar. He invited King Agrippa II and King Agrippa's sister, Bernice. And Festus tells everybody that this man, whose death is demanded by the Jews, but in my opinion, has done nothing deserving of death. However, since he appealed his case to the emperor, I have decided to send him to Rome. But what charge shall I make against him? Okay, so that's the reason why he's having this hearing, to find out, well, if you're going to send him to Rome, he has to have a reason. So he invites all these royal guests, you might say, including King Agrippa II. Now, King Agrippa II, his great-grandfather was King Herod the Great. King Herod the Great, you might remember, was the governor of this whole area when Jesus was born. And he's the one that killed all the babies that were 2 years and younger in Bethlehem. So Agrippa is the great grandson of King Herod. Also, according to Josephus, remember Josephus? Josephus is the Jewish historian that lived during the first century. He wasn't a Christian, okay, but he was a Jew, and he records that King Agrippa's sister, Bernice, they were having an ancestral relationship. King Agrippa never married. Okay, but anyway, Festus explains that he doesn't have any charges against Paul. Let's find out some details about him. So Paul once again witnesses to this group and tells them about his miraculous conversion. And then when he talks about his conversion and had a vision of Jesus and so on, Festus all of a sudden says, Paul, you're insane. You know, there's no such thing. How can you have a vision like this and then be converted? So Paul turns to King Agrippa and addresses King Agrippa and says, I know I can speak frankly and freely to you, for you understand these matters. And none of these things have escaped your notice. Don't you believe the prophets, King Agrippa? I know that you do. So apparently, King Agrippa II was familiar with the way. Maybe perhaps more of an intellectual exercise, you mean, because the way the Christian movement was growing, and he was kind of more intellectually curious about it. So he knew about them. I don't know if King Agrippa was part Jewish or not. I don't know. And then Festus says, do you think you can persuade me to become a Christian so quickly? And then Paul responds, whether quickly or not, I pray to God that both you and everyone here in this audience might become the same as I am, except for these chains. So he's witnessing to them about Christ. So by the end of the meeting, again, Festus says, this man, Paul, has committed nothing deserving of death under Roman law. But again, he's scared to release him. He won't release him. So he puts him on a boat going to Rome. So let me stop here and we'll pick up part 2 the next time, okay? Because there's a lot of things that will be going on in the future about what Paul does, or what happens to him actually as he goes to Rome. So let me stop here, and then we'll finish up the next time.